The word NPC in modern gaming is defined as static pillars of support. They are vending machines for quests, items, lore, and exposition that solely exist to facilitate the player's progression and fill in the necessary void in the story progression. However, this is not the case for the NPCs in Dark Souls, as they are weirder than you think. Most of them fail to support the player. They are often troubled by their own misfortunes and are entirely indifferent to the player's existence. They don't wait for you to finish your quest. They wander, they go hollow, and more often than not, they die by the very ambitions you helped them realize. A good example of this would be the Crestfallen Warrior, a man ruled so completely by apathy that he acts as a static monument to failure and hollowing, only to be driven into a terminal frenzy by the arrival of the primordial serpent Frampt. Speaking of which, these grotesque serpentine aberrations, on top of their weird design, are the essence of the manipulators who shape the player to follow their personal agendas. Even the more brighter characters like Solaire succumb to this fate. At first glance, he is the only beacon of hope, one of the few who manage to support the player in this decaying world, a man of unwavering sun worship and jolly cooperation. Yet, his weirdness is perhaps the most tragic of all. He's a man chasing a literal hallucination, traversing collapsing dimensions to find a personal sun that simply does not exist. This singular obsession leaves him blind to his own inevitable descent into madness. And to understand how these fractured identities define the very atmosphere of weirdness and tragedy, we need to dive into the very peak of this spectrum, starting with the man who watches it all crumble. The Crestfallen Warrior is the ultimate subversion of the guide archetype, and in many ways, the peak of the spectrum of weirdness in Lordran. In any other fantasy epic, the first person you meet at the central hub is a fountain of wisdom or a call to action. But here, we find a man whose weirdness is defined by his total lack of momentum. Just judging him by his armor screams of a glory that is long since curdled. He wears the chain armor set, whose description reads, "It is common throughout the human world, since it can be easily produced," signifying standard issue gear for a knight of no particular renown. It is practical, rusted, and unremarkable, fitting for a man who has decided that standing out is a waste of energy. Unlike Solaire's vibrant sun emblem or Lautrec's golden embrace, the Crestfallen Warrior's armor is dull and slumped. When the player approaches him, he doesn't stand to greet you. He sits as if he has grown into the very stone of the shrine, a human-shaped piece of furniture that exists only to mark your progress. His weirdness is cemented the moment he speaks.
"Well, what do we have here? You must be a new arrival. Let me guess, fate of the undead, right? Well, you're not the first, but there's no salvation here. You'd have done better to rot in the undead asylum. But too late now."
His voice is a cocktail of exhaustion and condescension. He mocks the player for even finding their way here. To him, your struggle isn't brave, it's repetitive. He laughs at the fate of the undead with a dry, rattling chuckle, a sound shared by almost every NPC in this world, signaling a mind that is already cracked under the weight of the cycle. This mockery isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a symptom of his stagnation. He provides just enough information about the two bells to keep you moving, not because he wants you to succeed, but because he's curious to see exactly where you'll break. He's the ultimate spectator to your suffering. What makes his response so bizarre is how he handles your milestones. When you actually manage to ring a bell of awakening, a feat that should be legendary, he doesn't congratulate you. Instead, he sounds almost annoyed that you've extended the performance. He notes your progress with a backhanded sneer, essentially telling you that while you've done well to get this far, the real nightmare is only beginning. He represents a specific type of weirdness, the NPC as a heckler. He's the only character who seems to realize he is in a game, or at least a cycle, and he finds the player's earnestness to beat it deeply pathetic. Even his posture is a weapon. He never stands, he never draws his sword to help you fight the Hollins just a few yards away, he simply watches. There is something profoundly uncanny about returning to Firelink Shrine after facing literal monsters, only to find this man in the same slumped position, speaking in the same wary drawl. He is a constant in a world of variables, a fixed point of failure. He doesn't wonder, he doesn't shop, and he doesn't pray. He simply is. This is why his reaction to the primordial serpent is the turning point of his entire existence. For a man who has made a religion out of not caring, the sheer physical wrongness of Frant is the only thing that can pierce his armor of apathy. He complains about the foul breath as if he's a disturbed neighbor rather than a knight in a fallen kingdom. It is the peak of the spectrum because it highlights a knight who has endured years of suffering but shows no apathy. But being unable to handle the foul breath of the serpent, the warrior finally stands up and relocates at New Londo ruins, only for the player to find him completely hollowed out and hostile. This transition from a man who refused to move to a man forced into madness by a monster's arrival brings us to the source of that discomfort. In contrast to this fading and dying world of Lordran, the NPCs are a perfect match. They lack apathy, are unmotivated, depressed, and are in general very strange. But apart from these souls, there are few like Solaire of Astora and Siegmeyer of Catarina that feel out of place and represent a different kind of weirdness, the one that does not belong to this world. Solaire in particular is arguably the most recognizable face of the franchise, but his weirdness is often overlooked, precisely because he is useful. As a summon, he is reliable. As a companion, he is friendly, polite, and unusually warm. His joy is sincere, his manners gentle, and his optimism is entirely unguarded. Look at the way Solaire greets the player, and then contrast it with the Crestfallen Warrior.
Ah, hello. You don't look hollow, far from it. I am Solaire of Astora, an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight. Now that I am undead, I have come to this great land, the birthplace of Lord Gwyn, to seek my very own son.
Where most NPCs speak with resignation or quiet contempt, Solaire speaks with open curiosity and is delighted to see how far you have come. This is the point of contrast, which makes him feel weirdly out of place in Lordran because he behaves as though the world still responds to human qualities such as strength of will, conviction, and heart. Where others expect collapse, Solaire expects continuation. Where most NPCs brace for disappointment, he allows himself to be impressed. And in a land defined by decay, repetition, and emotional erosion, that willingness to believe, to truly see value in perseverance, marks him as something deeply unusual. Not broken, not corrupted, just profoundly incompatible with a world that is already withered and ruined and lacks any trace of morality. Solaire's pursuit is also deeply strange. He's not searching for power, survival, or even purpose in the conventional sense. He is searching for his own son. His obsession is so personal and abstract that it barely registers as a goal in a world obsessed with rekindling flames and choosing a so-called rightful successor. While others cling to prophecy, gods, or inevitability, Solaire clings to a private, almost childlike ideal, one that exists entirely outside of the logic of Lordran. And that is what ultimately makes him strange. Not because he is foolish or naive or ignorant, but because he still believes something beautiful can be found in a world that has long since stopped believing in itself. If Solaire is a tragedy of obsession, Siegmeyer of Catarina is a tragedy of ego. His weirdness is immediate, both physical and behavioral. Clad in the unmistakable onion armor, a suit of rounded plates designed to reflect blows, Siegmeyer looks less like a hardened knight and more like a bumbling knight straight out of a fairy tale. In a world of sharp silhouettes and decayed austerity, he appears almost cartoonish. But it is not his appearance that makes him strange. It is how he acts. Siegmeyer presents himself as a knight of experience and honor, yet he spends the vast majority of the game doing nothing. He is perpetually mulling things over. He waits outside Sen's fortress for someone to open the gates. He waits at the swamps of Blighttown to ask for some purple moss. He waits in Anno Londo for someone to clear the Silver Knights. Whenever danger presents itself, his response is not action, but contemplation. Again and again, Siegmeyer frames contemplation as prudence, indecision as a strategy. Thought replaces action to the point where it becomes a kind of emotionless stasis. He's effectively the game's most heavily armored damsel in distress. This is not incompetence, it is avoidance. Siegmeyer came to Lordran for adventure, but the reality of the world is so hostile, so overwhelming, that he retreats inward. Whenever he encounters an obstacle, he enters a state of performative contemplation. Thinking becomes his shield. His laughter masks fear. His joviality masks dread. And unlike Solaire, whose optimism is outward-facing and sincere, Siegmeyer's cheerfulness is defensive. This becomes painfully clear when you help him. Each time the player intervenes, the game frames it as kindness, but narratively, every act of assistance is a quiet humiliation. Siegmeyer is grateful, but beneath it, there lies a gratitude of shame. Where Solaire measures worth through perseverance, Siegmeyer measures it through self-sufficiency. And every rescue chips away at the image he desperately wants to maintain, that of a capable knight who belongs in this world. And Dark Souls punishes him for that fear. Siegmeyer's story does not end in glory or redemption, but in one of the most uncomfortable conclusions in the game. After being rescued too many times, after failing to prove himself on his own terms, he finally hollows, not from despair alone, but from shame. His daughter, Sieglind, is forced to kill him. At the end, what makes Solaire and Siegmeyer so weird is not that they are foolish or naive. It is that they offer the player something Lordran does not actually trade in: hope. If Solaire and Siegmeyer represent a harmless weirdness, then the likes of Petrus, Patches, and Lautrec represent the most chilling segment of the spectrum, which is the moral weirdness. And what makes these characters truly weird isn't a lack of sanity, but a surplus of it. These men remain anchored by the most primitive, ugly human impulses. They act like predators in a world that has already run out of prey. While everyone else is struggling against the tragedy of the fading fire, these souls kill, pillage, lie, and act fully upon their own impulses to get what they want. They are disguised as sheep in wolf's clothing. Petrus is the peak of this uncanny behavior. He represents himself as the ultimate static pillar of support, a pious cleric with a bowl cut and a soft rhythmic voice. He greets the player politely and doesn't want to form any acquaintance unless necessary.
Hello there. I believe we are not acquainted. I am Petrus of Thurland. Have you business with us? If not, I'd prefer to keep a distance.
He even gives you a copper coin, a worthless trinket, as a token of peace. To a new player, he is the typical support NPC who sells you miracles and has some basic dialogue. But strangely, something feels off. Petrus asks you for some souls in return for the information of their private pilgrim, and what makes this moment truly unsettling is how casual it is. Petrus does not threaten you. He does not pressure you. He simply assumes that belief should be bought and that withholding knowledge is justified until it is. His piety is not about reverence or conviction, but control. Information becomes leverage. And once you notice this, everything about Petrus shifts. Beneath the veil is a viscous side. He is the most unsettling NPC because his weirdness is his disguise. His distance no longer reads as humility but insulation. His politeness feels calculated. His calm voice becomes a tool not to comfort, but to obscure. Petrus is not guarding faith from corruption. He's guarding himself from exposure. Later, when he abandons Rhea and the other clerics in the Tomb of the Giants, the pattern completes itself. Faced with real danger that cannot be negotiated, purchased, or deferred, Petrus chooses survival over responsibility. He lies about it afterward, smoothly and without strain, because lying has always been part of the structure.
You again? Me? I've become separated from my lady. I've scoured near and far, but no sight of her. Where could she have gone? My lady, to think I swore to protect you with my life.
The weirdness here is the performance. He continues to offer miracles, losing himself in grief while secretly relishing his freedom. If you buy information from Lautrec,
indeed. Maiden Tharaland and her followers recently arrived in this land, but she became stranded deep below the catacombs. Her followers either fled or were reduced to hollows, leaving Maiden Tharaland all alone.
and confront Petrus, he drops the holy persona and speaks of his true nature.
In the depths of the catacombs, Milady slipped off the giant's coffin and into a hole. Her two companions are no longer human, and the lass weeps in solitude. Right now, you could do as you please with her. The poor little purebred is entirely helpless.
If the player goes on to rescue Rhea, Petrus's response isn't relief. It's a cold frustration.
You rescued Milady. Well, a pity that is, for it will amount to nothing. For the little madam is not worth her salt without her family name.
The final stage of his weirdness is his endgame. If left to his own devices, he will eventually murder Rhea in the undead parish, standing over her corpse while still offering to teach you miracles. The weirdness of Petrus reaches its peak when you finally force his hand. When attacked, he doesn't plead for mercy or act like a victim. He reveals the wolf that has been sitting by the bonfire since the very beginning of the game. And if he manages to kill you, he delivers the most honest line in the entire game.
Too bad for you. I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing.
But there is another soul who is hiding not behind a bowl cut and some holy vows, but behind a shimmering golden shell. Lautrec's visual design is the first thing that marks him as an anomaly. He wears the embraced armor, a suit of brilliant gold where the arms of the goddess Finna literally wrap around his torso in a perpetual cold hug. In a world of rusted chainmail and hollowed out rags, Lautrec's armor is bright. But this isn't the radiant brightness of Solaire's optimism, but something blinding and misleading. When the player first encounters him, locked in a cell in the undead parish, he plays the role of the damsel in distress. But the moment he returns to Firelink Shrine, his weirdness manifests as a terrifying stillness. He sits directly across from Anastasia of Astora, the mute-caged Firekeeper. He doesn't move, he doesn't look at the tree or the sky. He watches her and laughs with a strange and evil demeanor. His dialogue is a series of cold rhythmic observations. He mocks the player's fading state.
By the Lords, your face. Your humanity is really slipping.
This is the peak of his moral weirdness. Contrast him with Siegmeyer, who is bumbling and helpful, or Solaire, who wants to be your companion. Lautrec sees you, and everyone else as a vessel to be emptied. He's a scavenger who has realized that in a dying world, the only currency left is the soul. The weirdness of this questline is that it is a countdown. If you don't kill him, he eventually fulfills his purpose. He murders Anastasia, not because he hates her, but because she is replete with humanity. He extinguishes the bonfire, the player's only point of safety, and flees to Anor Londo. When you finally invade him using the Black Eye Orb, he isn't alone. He has summoned allies. Lautrec is weird because he is functional. While the Crestfallen Warrior is paralyzed by apathy and Solaire is blinded by light, Lautrec is perfectly adapted to the dark. He is the only NPC who understands exactly how to win in Lordran by taking from those too weak to keep what they have. He isn't a villain in the traditional sense. He is a parasite in golden armor. If Petrus is the hidden rot and Lautrec is the golden scavenger, then Trusty Patches is the man who survives them both. Patches represents a special kind of weirdness. He's a recurring anomaly, appearing in almost every corner of the From Software multiverse, from Demon Souls to Elden Ring, always carrying the same bald head, the same squatting posture, and the same burning hatred for rotten clerics. What makes Patches the most weirdly capable NPC in Lordran is that he outsmarts everyone. Petrus and Lautrec are master manipulators, yet both of them are wary of him. Even Lautrec, a cold-blooded killer, admits that. I believe Lautrec hates Patches because Patches is the only person who can see through the Golden Knight persona. Patches doesn't play the game of masks. He knows exactly what Petrus and Lautrec are, and he mocks them for it. He calls Petrus scum and tells you,
That self-proclaimed cleric? Believe me on this one, bruv. The man is scum.
Patches' weirdness is his honesty. While Petrus lies about his intentions and Lautrec hides behind his goddess, Patches is remarkably transparent about his hobby, which is kicking you into pits. He lures you with the promise of treasure, and when you have inevitably survived his betrayal, he doesn't double down on the lies. He offers a pathetic, almost comedic apology.
I did you wrong, but I didn't mean it. These temptations, they can, well, overcome me. You know what I mean, don't you?
I think Patches is the most sane person in a world of lunatics. He isn't trying to link the fire or find a personal son. He just wants your stuff. He's weird because he treats the apocalypse like a business opportunity. The peak of his weirdness is his persistence. Patches is the only character who seems to exist outside the rules of time and space. I believe Patches is the true peak of this end of the moral spectrum, because he has outlasted gods and demons alike by simply refusing to be anything other than a petty thief. He's the NPC who is weird enough to realize that in a world that is ending, the only thing that matters is having the last laugh and your loot. Anastasia of Astora, the Fair Lady, represents the spectrum of tragic weirdness. These two exist in a state of stationary tragedy, one anchored by iron bars and broken legs, the other fused to a demonic spider husk. This is pain that exists without performance. In Lordran, suffering is usually loud. Bosses scream. Knights roar. Hollows shriek. But these two characters represent a suffering that has been normalized as a veil in a layer of mist. They are often ignored amongst the NPCs who are termed as weird, but their tragic fates are nothing but strange. Anastasia is the most uncomfortably weird NPC because she is less of a person and more of a piece of infrastructure. She sits in a lightless cell beneath the Firelink bonfire her tongue removed, her legs broken, and her eyes averted. She is a Firekeeper, and her weirdness is found in her total resignation. I believe the game uses the Crestfallen Warrior to set the tone for how the world views her. He mocks her existence with a dry laugh.
Oh, have you seen that terribly morose lass, the Firekeeper? She's stuck keeping that bonfire lit. Sad, really. She's mute and bound to this forsaken place. They probably cut her tongue out back in her village, so that she'd never say any god's name in vain.
To the warrior, she is a curiosity. To the player, she is initially just an option to reinforce your Estus flask. She's practically isolated from the rest of the world, and I think this is a deliberate design in the game. She's mute and is located inside a cell beneath the Firelink bonfire. A lot of the players might not even notice her existence until she has been murdered by Lautrec and the Firelink bonfire runs cold. The peak of her weirdness occurs if you go through the monumental effort to retrieve her soul from Lautrec and revive her. In any other story, this would be a moment of triumph, but in Dark Souls, it is a moment of profound awkwardness. When her tongue is restored, she doesn't thank you with immense joy. In fact, she stutters when she thanks you.
Thank you. I am Anastasia of Astora. Now I can continue my duty as a keeper. But I only hope that my impure tongue does not offend.
Her voice sounds like it's breaking under the weight of its own existence. I believe this is the ultimate tragic anomaly. She's so thoroughly conditioned by her martyrdom that she views her own voice, the very thing you fought to give back to her, as a sin. She doesn't want to be saved. She wants to return to the silence of her duty. She even tells you that she only wants to link the fire so that she can finally die human. Her weirdness is her dehumanization. She has become so at one with the bonfire that she can no longer imagine a life outside of its bars. If Anastasia is the weirdness of a silent cage, a fair lady is the weirdness of a silent sacrifice. Hidden behind an illusory wall in the heart of Quelaag's domain, she is a daughter of chaos, physically shattered and blinded. Like Anastasia, she is a Firekeeper, but her cage is her own mutated spider-like body and the crushing weight of a parasitic disease she took upon herself to save her servants. The most profound weirdness of the fair lady is the narrative barrier. Without the old witch's ring, she is just a shivering pale creature that responds to your presence with a hollow silence. You are a stranger who just murdered her sister, yet she can't even see the blood on your hands. Her physical design is also awfully strange. She is jarring, grotesque, hybrid. The upper torso of a pale, beautiful woman fused seamlessly to the abdomen of a massive white spider. Unlike her sister Quelaag, who moved with a predatory aggressive grace, the fair lady is inert. She is surrounded by a swarm of egg-burdened servants, but she herself is a dying cradle for parasites. As you feed her humanity, her legs, once limp and lifeless, begin to twitch and move with more strength. She responds with a heartbreaking sincerity. Every point of humanity you give her is a lie reinforced. You are merely prolonging a life of blindness and parasitic pain. I think this is the ultimate statement of the NPCs of Lordran. The world is so weird, so broken, and so indifferent that it treats most selfless martyrs as mere furniture. They are anomalies of kindness in a world of rot, and that kindness is exactly what destroyed them. But there is a final special category of this weirdness that completes the spectrum. The blacksmiths in the dying and fading world of Lordran are the only ones who seem to have a grip on reality. Yet their weirdness lies in their obsessive immortality. In a world where every other soul succumbs to hollowing or is met with a gruesome fate, these are the eternal pillars that outlive every being, even the gods. Andre is the most grounded character in the game, yet he is secretly the most meta-weird entity in the franchise. He sits in an old church cellar, bare-chested and perpetually hammering. I believe Andre's weirdness is his physical immortality. He doesn't just survive Lordran, he survives the end of the world. When we see him again in Dark Souls 3, which takes place thousands of years, perhaps aeons after the first game, he is the same. Same hammer, same anvil, same stubborn refusal to wear a shirt. While gods have died and civilizations have turned to ash, Andre is still here. I think this is the ultimate statement on hollowing. Andre is immune to it because his purpose, forging, is infinite. As long as there is a sword to sharpen, Andre cannot lose his mind. He is the constant in a world of variables. Then there is the gentle giant who is tucked away in a lonely corner of Anor Londo. The giant blacksmith is a masterpiece of tonal weirdness in a city built for gods. He's a massive creature who speaks with the innocence of a child.
Who are you? Forge your weapons?
He is happy to forge, and he helps any time. His weirdness lies in his purity. In a world defined by smiling liars like Framt or Petrus, the giant is incapable of deception. He's a creature of immense power who chooses only to create. The tragedy of his weirdness is found in Dark Souls 3, where we find his giant cold corpse still clutching his hammer. Even in death, he remained at his post, a mountain of meat and iron that finally ran out of time. Rickert is perhaps the most insane of the four. Despite appearing perfectly lucid, he is locked in a tiny stone cell overlooking the ghost-infested flooded ruins of New Londo. When you find him, he doesn't ask to be freed. In fact, he likes it there.
What is it? Have you? Oh no, don't worry. No intention of escape. It's safe here. I can't bear the thought of going hollow out there.
I believe Rickert represents the weirdness of academic apathy. He is so obsessed with the magic of sorcery smithing that he has completely tuned out of the horror of the world. He's a man living in a literal cage in a city of the dead, and he considers it cozy. And finally, we have Vamos, the most visually deranged of the smiths. He is a skeleton, not a hollow, but a fully sentient skeleton who has turned a coffin in the catacombs into a forge. He speaks with a voice that sounds like grinding rocks and has zero patience for your chosen destiny, and is the complete opposite of the giant blacksmith.
Be gone with you. You'll spoil my focus.
While the giant blacksmith is a mountain of flesh defined by gentle weirdness, treating his tools like friends and speaking with a childlike purity, Vamos is a literal bag of bones defined by a recluse hostility. The contrast is jarring. You move from the sunlit, silent companionship of a giant who helps anytime, to the claustrophobic, bone-riddled depths of the catacombs where a skeleton essentially tells you to get lost. I believe this makes Vamos the peak of post-human weirdness. He doesn't care about the fate of the world or the righteous nature of your quest. He has outlived his skin, his eyes, and his heartbeat, yet his muscle memory remains intact. He proves that in Lordran, a soul might fade, but the rhythm of the hammer is eternal. The NPCs of Lordran might be eccentric, but they still operate within the shadows of the giants. When you step through those fog gates, you aren't just facing obstacles or combat encounters. You are stepping into the presence of entities that have completely transcended our understanding of biology, divinity, and sanity. If you thought that these poor souls were a departure from reality, you haven't looked closely enough at the things that are actually worth running away from. From dragons that have mutated into literal gaping maws of hunger, to sisters of chaos fused into nightmare tapestries of silk and fire. Logic of the boss in Dark Souls is where the world's weirdness truly curdles. We're moving past the eccentric survivors and toward the things they are hiding from. Because as strange as the people are, the bosses in Dark Souls are weirder than you think.